Good morning and welcome to the Core Connection. I'm Mira Rubin here with you on Enlightened World Network. And today's topic is making the invisible visible. How can we come to know that which we don't know? How can we come to know that which we don't even know exists? And maybe this begs the question of knowledge and what is knowledge in the first place. So should be an interesting conversation. But before we get started, let's take a minute or two to get present. Let's take a deep breath in through your nose and hold it. And imagine clean, crisp oxygen flooding into your lungs, flowing into your bloodstream, nourishing all your cells, all your organs, bringing vital life energy to your body and being. And as you exhale, exhale any tension, stress, negativity, fatigue. And now let's take another deep breath in through your nose and hold it. This time, imagine brilliant, bright light lighting you up from the inside out, illuminating, electrifying, and energizing all your cells, all your molecules, your electrons, creating a brilliant beam of light and energy from your heart out into the world. And as you exhale, exhale any remaining tension, stress, negativity, fatigue. And now let's press our palms together. Vigorously rub your hands together to feel the friction, the temperature, the pressure, the sensation, the motion, the tickling and tingling when you stop. And allow all those sensations to bring you present right here, right now, into this remarkable physical form that enables you to experience life. Welcome, welcome. Good morning, Rosalind. So good to have you here with us this morning. And welcome to everybody else who's joining us. So today we're talking about making the invisible visible. And really what this is talking about is the nature of assumptions. And I don't know if you're familiar with the phrase making assumptions makes an ass of you and me. If you look at assume, it's kind of interesting. But when we make assumptions, most often we're not even aware of the assumptions we're making. So we might be having a conversation, and we've talked about this a bunch, but it warrants further conversation. Plus, I had a very lengthy conversation around this yesterday. So I don't think it's something that can be discussed enough. So when we have a conversation about a topic, let's say we have a conversation about capitalism, we might assume, we might launch into a debate, even a conversation, a debate, discussion, whatever you want to call it. And it could get heated even. And then if we were to step back and explore a little further, we might discover that we have very different ideas about what capitalism is. And in fact, some of this conversation came up around money. And I actually thought about doing a topic today about money because we did a really cool session yesterday with my cohort group on money. And the assumptions that we don't even know are there. So the question is, how in our lives can we access these assumptions, the underlying invisibles that are really dictating our experience? How can we access something that we don't even know is there? And I think that get lots of clues that are kind of cracks in the window or little openings in doorways that maybe can lead us to that kind of discovery if we have a willingness to follow the breadcrumbs or that little sliver of light coming out of that keyhole even in a door. So for instance, when we get activated, when we get angry about something, or we get really upset about something, or we find ourselves really activated is a great word. One of the things that we can look at is what's going on there. What is the fight about? What are the assumptions that are underlying this conflict or resistance? And maybe then we have the opportunity to challenge those assumptions. So, for example, we were talking about, and this might get me in hot water, so that was my hesitation. I'm just going to say it anyway. I have an opportunity to be working with a group around diversity, equity, and inclusion. And the specifics of DEI are not my area of expertise. And I have been endeavoring to educate myself more fully around this. And in the conversation around it, what we came to discover, because we're looking at, well, how can we each make a difference? The first thing that we were able to do is to identify that what's at play in what the underlying issue is, an issue of power dynamics, and that it's not limited. These power dynamics are not limited, although they may be institutionalized and very deeply and insidiously entrenched in a racial context. These power dynamics are not in any way limited to a racial context, and they're not limited even to a gendered context. And so we started looking at how can we most effectively truly create a shift in our relationship to power dynamics when we're not even present to how they operate in our lives. And so what we came to was that working with the microcosm, working with the most local kinds of engagements, because this is within a group, to look at the power structures within the group and the power dynamics that are unspoken, and the complicity with those power dynamics can start to wake us up to the unseen that we can then extrapolate outward. Whereas trying to apply an understanding of power dynamics from the outside in, as if it's not something that is propagated from the inside out also, or maybe primarily, is not going to be anywhere near as effectual as making the change in a localized way and having a real experience of how these dynamics are at play, how they're operative in each of us, and then allow that to look at how we can transform ourselves and our own behaviors, and then how does that then look within our institutional context. I don't know if that made sense. I'm hoping it made sense. But I think one of the ways that we can start to make the invisible visible is by asking questions about things that we don't normally ask questions about. So there are power dynamics, for example, within families. There are power dynamics within social groups. There are power dynamics within meetings, and there are all kinds of biases that surface within those interactions that if we can be in an active inquiry, we can recognize and uncover some of the patterns, some of our individual patterns, some of our own complicity, even within, let's say, quote unquote, established safe groups, that we can start to recognize, hey, there's this whole dynamic going on. And and I think it's kind of like when you, for instance, buy a car, or are shopping for a car, and you're looking for, and I realize not everybody shops for a car, but this is an interesting phenomena, that all of a sudden you start seeing those cars on the road. And the question is, were they always there and you just didn't notice them? Are you making the invisible visible? Or has something in the external environment changed? The likelihood is that you're making the invisible visible, like you're honing an awareness. And so I think as we become more aware of our own complicity and our own involvement with, for instance, power dynamics, then we will become more attuned to recognizing the power dynamics external to us. And then that can give us a greater visceral understanding and compassion. At least this is my hypothesis. Well, I guess we get to see if that's really true, but this is what I'm playing with at the moment, to be looking at what's at play in expressions of power. And then we can start looking at and seeing how these things are institutionalized as well, and how we might create new systems that are generated from a greater sense of equity and balance. And I think, so seeing the unseen. So another example, I mentioned that we had this awesome money exercise yesterday in the group that I run. And what we did was we gave everybody a few minutes to think, and I invite you to think, and this might make the invisible visible also, to be looking at, if money were a persona, and maybe we'll dig into this more deeply on another occasion, but if money were a person, who would that person be in your life? And what kind of relationship would you and money as this person have? What kind of characteristics, character traits would they have? What would your relationship be like? And if you were to go to coaching or therapy, what would be the things that you and money would work on in cultivating your relationship? And we gave everybody a few minutes to be exploring this, and people were surprised by the character that showed up as money. These characters that were mercurial, that would come and go, that really couldn't be depended upon, that were very stern and demeaning, all kinds of negative things. It was really, really interesting. And it was surprising to people to be embodying that relationship and to start recognizing some of the things that were at play in their relationship with money. And then we had everybody take some time to think about what kind of relationship with money they'd like to have, and see how money showed up then, if money showed up more as an ally. And it was quite remarkable, the transformation that people experienced when they said, well, wait a second, I don't want that kind of relationship. Now, if money's showing up in a way that is supportive, and people generated this whole different experience of money and a whole different relationship with money. And I think it was a really powerful exercise, because it enabled people to recognize some patterns that were at work that had been previously invisible, that had been hidden. And so by being playful with ourselves, by being curious, without judgment, we can create awareness and cultivate a perspective, and maybe even a sense of humor about ourselves. I have this one delicious client who has these ongoing revelations about herself, and she says, I just thought it was funny, because it's like, wow, what crazy humans we are, what crazy things we do, right? So Rosalind says, if Mr. Moneybags was present in the room, I visualize a male in a business suit. He's buying drinks for everyone at the table. That's fun. That's fun. Then the question is that somebody you want to be in relationship with, or do you want to, like what kind of persona of money is one that's going to be enlivening for you? Is it Mr. Moneybags, or is it somebody else that might show up? Rosalind says, are you highlighting that a possible source of resistance can have an element of power struggles? How am I threatened by this? Asking if am I under threat right now helps to open awareness to invisible boundaries that often stem from institutional constructs. That's complex. Let's see if we can take that apart. A possible source of resistance can have an element of power struggles, for sure. If someone is imposing something on us that we don't like, or see, the thing is, it's all in our interpretation. Somebody might be telling us to do something that's for our own benefit, but we might have an issue with the way they're telling us to do it, or the way that, or just being told to do anything. So we might have, it might trigger us into something, and we get to use that as an opportunity to recognize, oh, wow, I've got this hot button that I didn't even know about. What's up with that? So that's what I'm talking about. And then when you say, how am I threatened by this? That's a great thing to start looking at, is like, wow, where's that reactivity coming from? This person is really here to serve my good, and I'm reacting like it's an affront. So what's happening? Where am I? What's going on? There's an opportunity there to make visible something that was in play, even though we may not have been conscious of it. So it's an opportunity to make the invisible visible. And then Rosalind says, asking if, am I under threat right now, helps to open awareness to invisible boundaries that often stem from institutional constructs. I'm imagining that's probably true. Like if we're at work, there's a hierarchy and the boss can get really carried away with their role as boss, thinking that means they're superior. I mean, we even talk about our superiors in a work context, which is really interesting, because just because someone has greater authority doesn't mean they're superior. And so even looking at that conversation, looking at the language we use makes the invisible visible. So I remember having a conversation with somebody and they said, that's a hill I would die on. And we were talking about the patriarchy. And I said, that language is very much reflective of the patriarchy, where it's very conflict based and war and acquisition and conquering, and that hill I'm going to die on is really a war construct. And it's very interesting to note that they got very defensive, and it might have been because of the way I said what I said. So I would take some responsibility for that. And the thing is that when the invisible is made visible, especially by somebody else, there can be a lot of reactivity, because we don't necessarily want to see those things. We don't necessarily want to see our prejudices or our dominant behavior, or our whatever it is that we have judgments about. We don't necessarily want to see it, so we get confronted by it. Unlike this client that I was mentioning, who just has a wonderful sense of humor about recognizing, wow, oh my gosh, look at that, and then is able to take corrective action. So for instance, someone told them that they had felt really demeaned in a conversation, and they were able to step back and say, oh my gosh, I am so sorry. That was never my intention. And then they could look back on it to say, wow, look at that. To cultivate, initially it was upsetting, but then they could cultivate a sense of humor about how silly, how crazy we are as humans, and the kinds of things that we do, and how power comes into play, and a lot of assumptions around power that then can readily lead to abuses, whether those abuses are deliberate or often not even deliberate, but they're just kind of built in to the culture that we typically don't question. It's kind of like the emperor with no clothes. Everybody was told that the emperor had these magnificent new clothes that were of such fine material that you couldn't even see it, and here the emperors parading around in their skivvies, and it took a little child to say, hey, he's not wearing any clothes. It took a child to be able to make the actually quite visible. And that's actually the case in so many situations, when once we have spoken something, it becomes so obvious. So another situation like that was, I have another client who is writing a magnificent book, and it's very much about the matriarchy, or about the divine feminine. And yet what we made visible was that the way that they were approaching the whole topic was very, very masculine, very much from a masculine construct of rationality, linearity, academics. And here it was a very feminine, very mystical, kind of magical story. And yet, so here there was this huge dichotomy. And what the invitation was, once that was made visible, was, oh, what would it be like to approach this from the divine feminine rather than from this toxic rather than divine masculine? So I'm a big acknowledger that there is a divine masculine as well. We just have not really discovered that or brought that forth actively in our culture. And so these things become revelations. When we make the invisible visible, it's like a revelation. It kind of changes everything, kind of often opens us into new potentials, new possibilities, gives us permission to be in different ways. Like giving ourselves permission to be over the mandate of do, for instance, when we recognize how much of our life is a doing rather than a being, and we value being, then maybe bringing that invisible visible gives us permission to make a shift, to make different choices. And so how do we do it? We do it by questioning. We do it by following the breadcrumbs, by taking the opportunities. When something messy comes up in our lives, we get to look at it as an opportunity and to be fluid with it. So the just do it mentality, I think that paradigm is now shifting to just be. And what does that mean? And what does that mean? And what does that look like? And part of it is discovering and unveiling what was previously hidden. So with that, that's it for this morning. I'm Mira Rubin. This is the Core Connection, and I go live here each weekday morning on the Enlightened World Network page and YouTube channel at 9 a.m. Eastern. And I invite you to check out the other awesome programming on Enlightened World Network and Enlightened World Living. Rosalind says, create the environment for the flower bed to bud and blossom. The flower already has the DNA to grow into a flower. Exactly. So when we're looking for an opportunity, we're creating the context, the environment for that thing to flourish and to as you say, blossom. So until next time, always, always grateful for the opportunity to spend this time with you in exploration and discovery. So